And welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. So glad all of you are joining us as we are recording live here from Austin, Texas. And with me in the studio, none other than Tony Nelson. Welcome back to the show, Tony.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
And Nicole Troup. So glad that you are here.
Whoop, whoop.
All right. Yeah, that's a lot of excitement. All right, so
2 whoops.
Yeah, 2 whoops. Not quite at Texas A&M style, and you're not an Aggie, so that makes it even more wild. All right, but we're going to get to the question that's come up, I think, before, and I don't know if we actually ever answered it. But Tony, the one that's come up a lot for you of what does it look like to live above reproach, and where have you seen this question come up?
Well, you asked me the last time I was on the podcast.
That's right,
pretty
I did.
Directly, and we completely ignored it.
But we have seen this question come up just in normal interaction.
In a lot
with
of
people.
Context,
Yeah.
actually, in a lot of context.
Yep.
And so I think this is an important one because there are a lot of situations that men and women will find themselves in where they are not living in a way that's above reproach, and it causes a lot of problems. And so when as an example, I look at 1 Timothy 3, where it says, therefore an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, and it continues on and on. The question I had for some of the men around me was, what do they think above reproach meant?
Yeah.
And it was wild, the answers that I got.
Oh, what'd you get?
Okay, so some of the answers were, I have them written down, I can go verify in just a second, but some of them were like, if somebody wants to insult you, that you don't let it affect you or offend you. And I was like, no.
Interesting. So that you're above being offended.
Yeah, things like that. They'd take it that direction.
Wow.
So it was interesting, and I was like, okay, well, if men don't understand what in the world living above reproach means, it's going to be real hard to walk it out as just a general concept.
Yeah.
And so this is why I thought it would be good for us to circle back around and talk about this, because there's a lot of areas of our lives that we can easily be reproachable in, and figuring out how do you set up boundaries, how do you set up standards in your life, the bumper rails, if you will, so that you don't begin to veer off into territory.
What might be helpful, I know this might be overly simplifying it, but what can you define reproach?
Sure. So I would
helpful.
use... Yeah, so reproach as an example would be shame or...
How about criticism?
Criticism, yeah, those would be what reproach are. So being above reproach is to be blameless.
Blameless,
as an example.
You're a person that is... You can't reproach because there's nothing to reproach you about.
Correct.
Not because, I'm just above it.
Yeah,
It doesn't affect me.
so, I would, as an example, point to a couple of verses in Scripture that kind of talk about that as maybe the biblical definition of how this is being used. And so the 2 places I would turn to as kind of proof points for how this is being used is 1 Peter 3:16, where it says, having good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. Right? So if we're slandered for bad things that we're doing, rightfully so. But I think there's an element of when slander comes our way, not if it does, but when it does, that it should have no foothold in our lives, right? Or you could even go to Acts 25:7, where it talks about when he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove.
Right.
And so just kind of taking those 2 verses out of context for a second, but without going into the full scope of what those verses are really dealing with, just the idea of when people bring things to you, if they brought an accusation or criticism, would they be able to find fault in my behavior? I think is a good kind of litmus test, if you will. And so what I wanted to ask you both is just, how should men operate their lives so that they do live above reproach? Like, what would constitute living above reproach?
I think what's hard about that is if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. So it can't be that you don't sin.
Can't be that.
So it has to be that you are living in a repentant life so that when there is things brought up, you address it immediately. I think that becomes the
what does that look like tangibly, though, to live a repentant life?
Yeah, this is where within I think our church might be a little bit unique in this. Whenever you say unique, that's sometimes code for cultish, but and I don't want it to be that. But rather, confession and repentance looks like I confess my sins to the royal priesthood of believers, meaning like another man in my life, and then they pray the gospel over me, because confession to God is forgiveness, confession to another plus prayer is healing. And so that becomes, I think the beyond reproach is that if someone were to bring up something and they were right, like, Chris, you're flippant, or what you said to whomever was just awful. Mm-hmm. And if I had a group of people around me like, yeah, we already knew about that. That to me says beyond reproach, because that means my sins are not, they're not aware, and not something I'm dealing with. Now, I think they're talking about in 1 Timothy 3. I think it's more of a civic-minded, like you are a person that's upstanding. You don't take bribes. You're not engaged in unethical behavior. But I think unethical behavior can also be, there's the public unethical behavior and then the personal unethical behavior, and they mix sometimes. And I think that's why it's important to have people who know the private stuff as well as the public stuff, and then you're in confession and repentance about all that.
Yeah. I mean, this is not a biblical definition, but I'll kind of share my opinion about this, is that when we're talking about living above reproach, I think that what this really is alluding to is, you kind of talked about the moral stance of it, or the ethical stance, but being able to have my sinful habits or things that I'm doing under control enough or repentant enough, such that it doesn't cause people to look at me and go, I can't emulate you. I can't model my life after following you. Right? Because if you look at 1 Corinthians 11:1, it says, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. And if people can't look at my life and genuinely say, I could follow that man, then I'm living in a life that is not above reproach. There's something that's ethically off base.
So like, let's go to a non, like, I don't want to say it's a serious one, but like you're a person that's like, hey, I'll be at that thing. Oh, I couldn't make it because of whatever, right? Like, I think there's that, that drive, and especially in our culture, that would definitely make you a flaky person, which makes you not beyond reproach.
Correct. Yeah, I would go back to Scripture and say, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. If you're not going to make it to something, just say it. It's okay to say no. Right. It's perfectly fine to say no. Or if you can't make it due to circumstances, be honorable enough to tell the person. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things like that to where, to your point, if somebody were to say, I don't know. I'll use an example of something that recently happened. So we, as a group, had gathered some money for somebody who was going through a hardship pretty recently. And as we're gathering this cash from various people, I told my wife, I said, you know what we need to do? We need to keep everyone up to date on the total amount that is gathered and the exact date when this is going to be delivered. Because I never want anybody to be able to come up and say, you know what, I wonder if Tony's pocketing any of that money.
Oh, smart.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's man. I didn't even think. Yeah.
Right? And so just
because how many times do people like, I wouldn't even think about that, but of course.
Sure. Well, they give me the benefit of the doubt, which I appreciate, and I would say you probably should do. But on the other side, the reason that kind of perspective can continue to maintain is that I'll live my life in a way that's deserving of that benefit of the doubt in the first place. So they don't have to wonder, am I going to do something behind the scenes and fiddle with the numbers a little bit? Right. Am I going to skim a little off the top? Because I'll be real transparent about, here's the total, here's exactly how much is going to be delivered on this exact date, and full transparency on this stuff.
That's so good. I think
things like that.
One of the reasons why I don't know finances here at the church is for that purpose, so that there can never be like a thing of favoritism. Right. It can be frustrating in some ways because you have no idea about a lot of stuff, but if somebody wants to like give money to the church, I just in general say, hey, don't give it to me. Go put it in the box. Go, I don't want to have to.
Don't touch it.
I don't want to mess with that. Thankfully, we deal in electronic transactions and even checks. So for the most part, you're kind of safe these days. But back in the olden days, like here's $300. You're like, I don't want to call. That's sort of a wild deal. Beyond reproach. I think also
we were talking about this in discipleship last week.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
We didn't frame it this way, but I think it definitely applies here. Is it like Leo was talking about, like, there are some people who think that, I would never be tempted to cheat on my husband.
Right.
Oh, I would never be tempted to steal money from the church. And what her point in this conversation that we were having was that, like, always think that you're capable.
Everybody has a price.
Right. Always think that you're capable of any kind of sin.
Yeah.
And I think that is how you live above reproach, is like you take measures like, would you ever be tempted to steal somebody's money? Like, probably not. Like, you're having the foresight to like put that, like, be transparent about it. Like, you're probably not going to do that. And that's why people are giving you the benefit of the doubt. But you're humble enough to know that
Totally possible.
it is totally possible.
Oh, yeah.
And you're reasonable enough to put things in place so that people know that that's not happening, and so that people can hold you accountable.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with like church finances. Like, how many times have you heard of a pastor embezzling money from his church, or the church secretary embezzling money from the church? You know, like, I never count alone. Dave Sheffield reconciles our bank statements every month, and so does our bookkeeper. So there are like 2 or 3 different sets of eyes on everything that we do financially, because I don't want, like, I have a very large responsibility in handling the church's money, and I don't want to ever be in a place where I feel like I can take anything.
Yeah.
You know?
One of the other things we also do here is, well, we have men and women, and we don't, like, married men don't ride in a car alone with a single woman or a married to somebody else woman.
Yeah.
We go in groups of 3, you know, like
Somebody's always present.
because it's just weird. You have no idea what emotional intimacy can be built over a car ride. Beyond reproach means I don't even want to have people thinking, like, we're at a restaurant, oh, you must be on a date, you know, like, you know, whatever that, even if it's just, it could be a complete business meeting for the most part. We're not, we stay far from as much as possible. And in fact, there was one time, I think, one of the ladies here had to give me a ride home, and I was like, oh, I felt so weird about it. And I call Adrian on the way. I was like, hey, I just want you to know I'm in the car, and we're driving, and just letting you know the whole time, I just want to stay on the phone with you. Not because I thought anything was going to happen in a literal, like, 1.5 mile drive, but it was, I think the wisdom there is I don't ever want to put myself in a position where someone could accuse me of something like that, because that especially as a pastor, when you kind of you're dealing with people's most intimate, vulnerable moments, and if you're sort of shady on that, it can be a little bit challenging.
Yeah,
Sure. It's a huge protection barrier for you as well.
Yeah. Oh, for
right?
sure.
Being willing to say, and I know I've had this conversation with women where they're like, I don't understand why you're making this such a big deal. Like, it's just a couple blocks down the road. Can you give me a ride? And I'm like, not unless we have a third person. Right. And some of this is because it's not that I am concerned about what she will do necessarily, but it is a protective measure to say, if she were ever to say an accusation of, like, Tony touched me in the car ride.
Yep.
Right. Having a third person there to be able to confirm or deny is of huge benefit to me and to anybody else. Right.
Right.
And so it's like there's just to me, that is what it means to be able to live above reproach.
Yeah.
Is being able to say, when an accusation like that comes around, people would hear it and go, it doesn't match up with the character that we've seen.
Right.
So you talked about having that perspective of, I would never cheat on my spouse. So I mentioned that Jessica and I had an affair 30 days into marriage, filed for divorce, all that stuff, right? So we fought through that, came down to Austin.
Yeah, you stay married.
Stayed married, yep. So March will be 14 years. So we obviously worked through that, figured out how to let God completely transform that. But in the process of that, I had a very prideful heart back in the day of thinking, I'm a dude that's built on loyalty. How could she have done this to me? I would never do something like that to her. But I grew up as a guy that had a tremendous amount of female friends. Just a lot. Just a lot of female friends. I thought nothing wrong with that. I'm going to step on people's toes in just a second. But I got my first engineering job coming out of college. Right. And it was one where I was traveling out to client sites, and I was paired with a sales lady. She's a great lady. I've worked with her at several companies, and we traveled out, and there's just a lot of relationships that get built when you're traveling. Of
course.
Right? No big deal. A lot of inside jokes too.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it kind of opened my eyes to, anybody is susceptible to
Right.
this.
Yeah.
So we got home. We got back to the office one day, and on Fridays we'd pull together the team inside of my office, and we'd have beer, water, energy drinks, whatever you wanted to have, just sit and kind of share about how the week went. And she told a joke that didn't land with anybody, but I start snickering because it was something that we had experienced on the travels together. And she goes, I knew none of you guys would get it, but Tony gets it because he's my work husband.
Oh,
And it dawned on me that I was like, oh my gosh, I may not have any relationship like ties and connections that way, but I have allowed myself to get close enough to her that she developed it. She felt comfortable enough saying that kind of thing in front of a group of people, knowing full well that I'm married.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, okay. So ultimately, this is what it pointed to, was that I had allowed myself to give relational capital to another woman instead of my wife.
Yeah.
Such that she could build up enough confidence to say something like that.
That's
from
bold.
From the fullness of her heart, she could say something like that.
Yeah.
And
think nothing of it, really.
Think nothing of it. Now, what was wild was that woman eventually got married, and eventually there was an affair that happened in their marriage. And then we were the couple that they came to.
Oh, that's wild.
And we got to walk them through that restorative process of like,
wild.
here's how you fight through this.
Yeah.
But one of the things you got to work on is you got to correct some things.
Yeah.
Right. And it was just wild to see. But anyway, that's an example of like, there's so many times where we might say, this is no big deal.
Right.
It's not any big deal until it is.
Yeah.
It's never a big
and
deal.
I've heard from friends of mine who have husbands who have had emotional affairs.
Oh yeah.
With other women, and how like that's almost more harmful than if they had just had sex with another woman, you know? And at first I didn't really understand that, but like hearing you describe this, it makes a lot of sense. Like you're taking like that emotional relationship, that emotional equity, relational equity that you should be giving to your wife, you're stealing from her and giving to another woman.
Correct.
That you're not in a covenantal relationship with, and that like that is a crossing of a line. Yeah, like you're saying.
Yeah, that is powerful. I think that's the reason why we have those specific rules is because, again, when you're at church. I'm just thinking church staff for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're dealing with affairs of the heart, people, stuff.
Yes.
It's not just numbers and finances, although that can go intimate real quickly because like, did you get that? That's what I got too. You know, the me too, like the me too's overtake somebody, and then next thing you know, they're down a path they never intended to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. All right, so when you have this conversation, I appreciate that you said like when people, what does it mean to live beyond reproach, and they're like, you don't take criticism. Like let's go back to that initial question. And so what are the other things in your life, Tony, that have gotten, and maybe this is the direction you were initially thinking, to live beyond reproach? How do we do that? You got some safeguards in my life coming around opposite sex, but there's financial guards that we have. And when dealing, I just really appreciate what you said about just kind of even taking money. And what other things are we having to sort of be concerned about when it comes to living beyond reproach?
Yeah. I'll share with you a couple of others. Just pulled up my notes here. One of them said, avoiding anything that could potentially be offensive to others.
Wow.
Okay.
Hold on. That's kind of, potentially offensive. What does that even mean?
Well, I can understand in some capacities not doing something because it could potentially be offensive. Right. Because like I said, many things are not a problem until they are a problem. Right. And so a lot of these things that you and I are avoiding, or I guess the three of us are avoiding, are the potential problems, not actual problems. Right. So we're doing things to safeguard against the possible, not the actual.
Yeah.
And so I get that. But in this case, when we're talking about doing anything that could potentially cause another person to be offended, I think that can veer off into areas where you might not want to tell a person the truth because it might offend them, or you might
or
not
live
do
like
something.
this gets into like pronouns and viewpoints, and I don't want to go political on that, but I think you can kind of you can go all sorts of direction, and the very truth the gospel's offensive. And so, and it might be that what they're saying is like, don't be intentionally rude. And that's where
Sure.
where
Yeah,
they're going.
and I would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
Another one was that you should walk your Christian life in such a way that you rise above anything that comes your way. That was another one.
What does that mean?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it gets back to
you know?
don't let criticism get you down. Rise above it. Be
above.
beyond reproach. You
Rise
are
above.
so awesome. And you look at all these other nitwits around you that you are just superior to anything they might have to say. There's a part of that where it's like a Taylor Swift shake it off kind of moment, but it's also like don't get any feedback from people. And I think that can be dangerous. That's sort of fun. That's a fun response to that.
I think there's a healthy balance to that. Like in some ways the like Taylor Swift shake it off is the right mentality, and in other ways it's not. Like you can't live that way all the time, like completely disregarding someone's feedback, because then you're not able to take correction or whatever,
right.
And so
Sure. Well, okay. Well, let me ask you this. What if the feedback that they're giving you is off base?
Yeah.
is off base.
Mm-hmm. Like legitimately off base, just completely off.
I mean, if someone said that to me, I would probably have a conversation like, why? Like, where are you getting this from? Like, why do you think this? What have I done or said to make you like give me this feedback?
Gosh, that's a hard one. Because
like,
would you give it validity if someone said something ridiculous?
I mean, I want to hear where they're coming from first. Maybe where they're coming from is ridiculous, and then we can have a conversation about maybe what they actually really feel,
right?
Instead of what they're saying they feel.
So yeah, like when someone says something, there's a what's the underlying issue that you're presenting this whatever.
Yeah, because sometimes I feel like people, when they're giving you feedback, they beat around the bush.
Okay.
Especially in the South. Like, nobody is direct here.
What?
Except for Tony Nelson.
Except for Tony. You're from a different part of Texas.
I guess so.
That is always the image of like Southern hospitality that I've had my whole life, is that nobody is direct,
Bless your heart.
You're
Yeah.
right. Which really means,
Yeah.
we all know what it means now because it's in the open. But
bless
yeah.
her.
So I don't know. I would always want to get to the root of what someone's like really actually trying to say. And if it is ridiculous, I'll just be like, well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because I do think you don't want to just write people off because they might be seeing a blind spot.
Yeah.
At the same time, and that's why community is so important.
Yeah.
Like, hey, someone said this. Do you see that? And asking those questions on the regular, man, that's hard. What is it like to be on the other side of me? That's a question.
Oh,
That's
last
super
year we did the Hill Country Week of Fasting or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
and that was one of the questions that we had to ask each other.
Yeah.
Like, what's
good.
it like to be on the other side of working with me?
Yeah.
Oh, it was very insightful.
Yeah. What did you get from? What did I say to you? Or what did?
I don't remember.
Do you remember what I said
said
to you, or
me.
what you said to me?
I remember what Melanie said to me.
Oh, what'd she say?
Melanie told me that my mood tends to influence a room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, now is that meant as a positive or negative?
It can go both ways.
That's true.
It can go both ways. Yeah, it is.
Okay, well, when she said it, did she mean it as a positive or a negative thing?
She said it can go both ways. She said,
Okay.
and she was just saying that to like tell me to like really be aware of what you're bringing in with you when you're in a meeting, because if you're in a sour mood, it's gonna muddle the mood of the entire thing. But if
Well,
you're
that was really insightful and
Yeah,
sweet of her.
it was. But if you're joyful and content, like it's gonna reflect on the like, environment, like meeting environment that we're in. And so, yeah, it truly was both.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah.
Just
What's it like to be on the other side of me in the off here at
On the other
church?
side of
yeah,
you?
Yeah, I would love to know that.
You want this on record?
Yeah.
It's a battle sometimes.
A battle. All right, give me what's the battle.
You are a charismatic and inspiring leader, and you are very easy to follow. And sometimes you can be very difficult to work with because you are literally all over the place all the time.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
It's hard to keep up with you.
Well, you got to run faster. You know? Here.
Some
would you
people
like
just
some
aren't.
self-
Some people just aren't made that way.
That's true.
I kind of think of myself as a happy fun ball.
You're a bouncy ball.
Yeah, I am.
You
I'm a
are.
bouncy ball.
I use that metaphor all the time
Yeah.
because it perfectly describes who you
Yeah,
are.
I use that a lot with my wife, and she does not. No, I think she agrees with it. She doesn't appreciate it. I think it's kind of where that comes from.
yeah.
Oh, that's wild. Okay, yeah, I think that's probably very true. I appreciate that. That's,
Yeah. You're welcome.
I could probably grow in that area of being easier to follow. Yeah. Well, I think we all have a lot of issues there.
Like yesterday during Melanie and I were meeting with you, and
Yeah.
you have this wonderful idea that you want to share with her, but we're in the middle of a meeting, and you're like, "Let's go to the worship center right now." And she was like, "Can we finish this meeting first?"
Yeah, she did very.
She did a great
She did a
job.
great job of handling me. I was like, I had
She
a
did a great
moment of
job.
inspiration. I was like, this is awesome. And then I got to show her it like 10 minutes later. But yeah, I did appreciate that she goes, no, you can't show me that now. We're still in this meeting. I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
that's
She kept
helpful.
you on track, but she still allowed room for you to like share your
Yeah.
idea with her.
Because I have
at
a
the
lot of
appropriate
fun
time.
ideas.
The fun is debatable, but yeah, you have a lot of ideas.
That's fair. That's fair. Tony, do you ever get those kind of questions? Do you ever ask that of others? Like, what's it like to be on this side of you? And
I do. I do ask that.
What response did you get?
Well, I ask this frequently enough because I'm constantly trying to figure out where my blind spots are and where I can operate in my strengths rather than weaknesses. I have a tendency to do that. But it's also nice to get an update on me just every once in a while, right?
Because you
Just
do
to-
change. You do morph
do
over
change.
time.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So I'm a very different person now than I was when I first came to the church.
Yeah.
as an example. Very different.
You were way more direct than you've become more diplomatic over time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I took the perspective, like back then, I was the person that said, I don't care what the truth is. I just want to know what the truth was.
Right.
Which is how I came into just looking at everything very critically of Christianity, of any kind of formal religion. It was
Yeah, that was good.
I was like, I don't care what it is. I just need to know the truth. But you better bring some evidence to prove that this is true.
Yeah.
If I'm going to follow this
It
thing.
was great. Yeah.
But I also took the perspective of somebody needs to tell you the truth because clearly nobody in your life is, and this is going to hurt your feelings, and I don't care because you need this.
You need this.
You need this.
And you know what's
That was-
wild? What's wild about that? I think at least okay. How about this? The people that appreciated it stuck to you, and those that didn't.
I didn't care.
Yeah, you didn't. Well,
I didn't
and you didn't care, but in general, they kind of made their way out. But a lot of people are like Tonyites, and they love that methodology. And I think there's a real sweetness to it once you can get past the directness.
Yeah, well, there's also like a softening of things,
Yeah.
right, over time, because that non-Christian perspective was I didn't care about the damage that I was doing. Now I find it to be more important that I wound you as a friend, but that you know it's being done out of love and compassion.
That's
I'm
good.
also far less prone to do it publicly.
Isn't
Yeah.
there a proverb about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm also far less prone to do it in front of a group of people, whereas before I didn't mind calling you out on stuff in front of people because
Yeah.
everyone needed to know. Now I think it's important that you know, but that needs to be done in private.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, more of the confronting. So there is a compassionate side, an appropriate way to do things, right? And that was a learning curve that I had to have over time. But
That's good.
But that was one of them. Probably the biggest one to answer your question that I got last time is that it can be hard to relate to me because I think too fast for a lot of people. Here's what I mean. If somebody asks me a question that they're struggling with, or if I were to ask them a question, they need a little bit of time to think. Whereas if somebody asks me a question, I pretty quickly am able to articulate
Right.
a response
Right.
because I've made it a habit to think about what I think about. I think thoughts and I sit down and I have time to just think, which is not a normal habit for most people.
A lot of people are out loud processors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're out loud processors. But I would also say they don't give themselves a time to process. You know, when we had that conversation with Katie here, this is her time to process.
Yeah.
Okay, what she didn't recognize is I have a separate time to
Right, right, right.
process. And so I'll process there. And then when I come back here, a lot of my stuff has already been pre-thought.
Yeah, what he's talking about is a couple podcasts ago, Katie goes, did you just think about this, plan out what you were going to say? And he's like, yeah. Yeah, I did. I think about what I think about. And I think that I appreciate that. And I think more of us can do, and again, I think this is where a lot of us in our time with the Lord, and this now I'm going a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
But in your time with the Lord, that's where you can mend out a lot of the stuff you're processing in life. And a lot of my own ecclesiastical or intellectual or just theological viewpoints are meted out in the time alone with God, because I do process a lot of that. And I think that comes with just time alone with him. And I need that. So anyway, okay. Well, that's awesome. Well, hey, I think we're going to wrap this up. Any other thoughts? Final thoughts?
No.
Hey, thanks for watching. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe if you want to tell others about how they can be living beyond reproach. This might be a good one to send them. And just if you want to text in about any more questions, just text us at 737-231-0605. We'd love to hear from you. And from our house to yours, have an awesome